The Democratic Republic of Congo is facing international scrutiny. This follows the execution of 102 individuals at Njenga prison. The Congolese government identifies these men as Kulunas, a term for urban bandits. They were convicted in connection with a recent surge of violence in Kinshasa and other urban centers. This mass execution has sparked outrage and ignited debate. The situation remains tense, as another 70 individuals await the same fate at Njenga, a high-security facility in the northwest. The executions are the first since the lifting of a 21-year moratorium on the death penalty. President Felix Tshisekedi made the controversial decision in March 2024. This move came amidst growing pressure to address the escalating crime rates. The recent executions signal an intensification of the government's hardline approach. These events have placed the DRC in a harsh international spotlight. Human rights organizations and foreign governments are voicing their concerns. They question the judicial process and highlight the dangers of extrajudicial killings. The situation is further complicated by the DRC's history of political instability and violence. The executions raise critical questions about justice, security, and human rights in the DRC. The international community watches closely as events continue to unfold. The world waits to see what actions the Congolese government will take and what consequences, if any, will follow. The Congolese government defends the executions. They argue that these are necessary measures to combat the rising tide of urban crime. Citing an alarming increase in knife attacks and robberies, the government points to these incidents as evidence of a growing threat to public safety. They also claim that some Kulunas are collaborating with foreign armed groups, destabilizing the eastern regions of the country. Fueling the government's narrative is the undeniable reality of rising crime rates in major Congolese cities. Years of conflict, poverty, and instability have created a breeding ground for lawlessness. Limited opportunities and a lack of social support systems push many young people towards criminal activity. The government emphasizes the fear gripping many citizens who are demanding action against the gangs terrorizing their communities. Despite government assurances, skepticism persists. Critics argue that the executions are a brutal overreaction to complex social problems. They point to a lack of transparency in the judicial process. Concerns are also raised about the potential for abuse and the targeting of individuals based on flimsy evidence or political motivations. The government's use of the death penalty raises questions about its commitment to human rights. The international community is watching closely for any signs of due process violations. The situation highlights the challenges of addressing crime and security issues in fragile and conflict-affected states. The international community must grapple with the complex interplay of factors contributing to violence and instability in the DRC.
Public reaction to the executions is divided. Some Congolese citizens, especially those who have directly experienced the brutality of the Kulunas, express support for the government's actions. They argue that the executions are a necessary deterrent. They hope it will bring a much-needed end to the reign of terror in their neighborhoods.
However, religious leaders and human rights advocates have voiced strong opposition. The National Episcopal Conference of Congo, CENCO, the Church of Christ in Congo, ECC, and prominent figures within the Islamic community have condemned the executions. They emphasize the sanctity of life and advocate for rehabilitation over capital punishment. Adding to the complexities of the situation, some revivalist churches, particularly those affiliated with Pentecostal denominations, have expressed support for the death penalty. They argue that it is a just punishment for those who threaten national security and the safety of citizens. This division within religious groups reflects the broader societal debate surrounding the executions. The range of reactions underscores the sensitive nature of the issue. It highlights the deep divisions within Congolese society. The government's decision to proceed with the executions despite widespread condemnation from religious leaders and human rights groups has drawn criticism. Critics accuse the government of prioritizing a hardline security agenda over dialogue and reconciliation.
Human rights organizations have strongly condemned the executions. Amnesty International has called the situation absolutely appalling. They highlight the lack of transparency surrounding the trials of those executed. The organization points to a disturbing pattern of irregularities in the Congolese justice system. This raises concerns about the possibility of forced confessions, unfair trials, and extrajudicial killings.
Furthermore, the conditions at Njenga prison have been the subject of intense scrutiny. Reports of overcrowding, inadequate healthcare, and deaths in custody due to starvation and disease have fueled concerns about the treatment of prisoners. Human rights groups argue that the executions represent a violation of the right to life and a blatant disregard for international human rights standards.
The executions have also raised concerns about the potential for the Congolese government to use the death penalty as a tool of political repression. Critics fear that the government may target political opponents or those who dare to criticize its policies under the guise of combating crime. The international community is being urged to pressure the Congolese government to halt the planned executions and to commute the sentences of those on death row.
The situation in the DRC serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of human rights, especially in contexts marked by conflict, poverty, and weak governance. The international community must remain vigilant in monitoring the situation and advocating for the protection of the rights of all Congolese citizens. The use of the death penalty, particularly in a context where due process is questionable, raises serious concerns about the state of the rule of law in the DRC. This is Pan-African InfoPulse TV reporting, reminding you to subscribe and to stay tuned for the latest on this critical development and more. Let Africa's pulse beat strong on Pan-African InfoPulse TV.